Good morning. I hope everyone is enjoying Site 2016. And it is my pleasure to have the opportunity to introduce Dr. Michael Spector. Dr. Spector is currently a professor and former chair of learning technologies at the University of North Texas. Dr. Spector earned a PhD in philosophy from the University of Texas at Austin. His research focuses on intelligent support for instructional design, assessing learning in complex domains, and technology integration in education. Dr. Spector is a past president of the Association for Educational and Communications Technology, as well as a past chair of the Technology, Instruction, Cognition, and Learning Special Interest Group of AERA. Dr. Spector is editor of Educational Technology Research and Development and serves on numerous other editorial boards. Dr. Spector edited the third and fourth editions of the Handbook of Research on Educational Communications and Technology, and as well the Sage Encyclopedia of Educational Technology. Once again, it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Spector to Savannah and Site 2016 as an invited speaker.
Yeah, thanks for that nice introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. I have to apologize for not being here yesterday and creating some disturbance in the schedule. I had been in Beijing for about 2 weeks, the second time I've been there this year, and the first time I was there in January was when I made the travel arrangements to come here. And I think I need a smart technology for travel planning. Because I got confused about the time differences. So I thought I was leaving early morning yesterday, and it turned out I was leaving in the evening, and discovered it after the program had been printed. So my apologies for that confusion. But I made it here. So I'll have a few things to say about smart learning environments, and then there's a lot of other things I really want to say, so I'll squeeze those in the middle. And we'll go for I guess about an hour. So a couple advertisements here and chances for publication, but also to emphasize a point about smart learning environments. There's a major online reference work called Learning Design and Technology, and you'll see at the bottom this is an online reference work with large articles, larger than would be in a journal issue. 7,000 to 17,000 words, and it'll be online. It'll be refreshable. You can have links to other kinds of things online. So a very ambitious undertaking, but smart learning environments is one of the issues there. Kinshuk is the section editor for that. Each of these sections is basically a book-length effort, and Kinshuk is far ahead of anyone else in creating that particular section of this work. But if you're interested in getting some of your work published in any of these areas, broadly covering educational technology, don't hesitate to let me know, and we'll work something out. And then I'm going to mention a couple conferences. Also, again, to emphasize the point that smart learning is turning up at a lot of these venues, not just at Site, but I just came from a conference in Beijing where it was the major topic. ICALT is an international conference for advanced learning technology in Austin, and there will be a section there focused on adaptive systems and smart learning environments. And then there's an Educational Technology World Conference right after ICALT. This is a good one to go to if you're interested in a nice vacation venue, Bali, Indonesia, and there's going to be some papers there on advanced learning technologies and smart learning conferences. There are 2 new journals that have to do with smart learning environments. One started in 2014, edited by Kinshuk and Rongwei Wang, who's at Beijing Normal University, and Elliot Soloway. It's a Springer open source journal, and it's already has issues you can see online. And there's a second one called the International Journal of Smart Technology and Learning. It's an interscience journal. It's not online, and the first issue is in press, I suppose is what you should say. Professor Gu Lin at my university and Jingshu Li are the editors of that one. So there's new journals in this area of smart learning environments. And then it's interesting that both of these journals have lead editors in Asia. and they're not connected with a professional association. So some journals are, some aren't. So smart learning cuts across a lot of different disciplines, and there is no, that I know of, association for smart learning technology. There is an association associated with AI and education, and that journal, International Journal of Artificial Intelligence and Education, is another open journal. It's been around for 25 years, but it focused early on intelligent tutoring systems, and I'll have some more to say about ITSs and how smart learning is changing the history that started with ITSs. There's a number of conferences involving smart learning environments. Smart Education Conference was in Beijing in January. I was there for that. And the point now is there seems to be a lot of new attention being paid to smart learning environments. So we have to understand what's involved in a smart learning, and that's the terminology that's being used. So what's involved in a smart learning environments, where have we been? I'll have probably more to say about that. Where are we going? My motto is onward through the fog, for those familiar with Austin, Texas, and Oat Willie's. So I don't know where we're going, but here's an exercise. I like to have some interactivity in my talks. So this will be a thought experiment because we won't have time to get a lot of input. But think of someone you know that you would regard as very smart. Get that person firmly in mind. Who do you know that you would regard as very smart? So I'm going to work on this word smart for a while. So you got someone in mind? The person I had in mind was a philosophy professor I had at UT Austin, O.K. Baalsma. So why did you think that person was smart? What was it that that person did, or what were the attributes of that person that made you think this person was exceptionally smart? Maybe I should have some interaction, right? So it's too quiet, right? Does anybody want to volunteer? Who you thought of and why you thought of that person? Okay.
I have a sister who has really good insights on any issues going on in the world, and she writes them. She's been published several places, and she has a blog that she writes. And Oprah called her on to be on the show just because something she put on her blog that was insightful into a contemporary issue.
Okay, that's an interesting answer. So my interpretation of that, insight, but across a number of domains, not really focused in one domain, but broadly insightful, maybe, and we could add creative and flexible and so forth. And then the person that I thought of, I mentioned my professor, Baalsma, and it was because he actually was good at listening. Usually in a philosophy course, there's a lot of telling that goes on. So the professor stands and tells you what you should think about Kant or how to interpret Nietzsche or whatever. That's not how Baalsma worked. He would come with a passage and it would be discussed, and he would listen to the discussion and not say anything, typically for about 2 hours. And then after 2 hours, he would synthesize in the form of a joke everything he had heard, and it was really exactly on point. So he was also flexible and insightful, but really good at listening and reflecting. So then, if those are the characteristics of a smart person, is it reasonable to think that those characteristics could or should be applied to a smart technology or a smart learning environment? So that's making a transition here. So I'm not answering the question, I'm really asking that question. So what do we expect of a smart learning environment? Do we expect the same thing that we would from a person? So there are a lot of dimensions to think about here. We can think about the device itself, and of course we have the word smartphones. We could think about the software. Intelligent tutoring systems had a particular software architecture. We could think about the environment. We have the phrase smart learning environments that takes into account a larger context. We could think about the pedagogy. We have flipped classrooms, for example, or we could think about the use. And I'm inclined to think about the use first, partly based on my experience. So I worked on what might be called intelligent support for instructional design, and we developed 2 different systems. This is back in the 1980s and 90s, before some of you were born. And we took two different approaches. One of those approaches was to replace the instructional designer. We're going to create a system that's going to take subject matter input and a particular learning goal, and we're going to generate the instruction based on just that input. And that had some success. We use Dave Merrill's the transaction theory to create that system. And then the second system was a different approach. We're going to augment what a less experienced instructional designer is able to do by providing powerful tools. And so that's a weak AI approach, artificial intelligence approach, trying to augment what a person can do, make that person perform more like an expert. Or the strong AI approach is to completely replace an activity that a person did. So my experience, and I looked at some other systems, was the weak AI approaches had more success. So then a question going forward is that going to remain true for smart technologies? Are we going to be replacing teachers? My personal view is not likely, but we might be supplementing what a teacher is able to do and make that teacher able to perform in stronger ways. Because I'm trained in philosophy, I have to deal with definitions, right? And words are important to me. So here's a couple that I'll mention. So instruction simply defined is that which is intended to support learning. And we're talking about intentional learning, typically in a formal setting, but not necessarily. Learning, this is the key one to think about. This is what we overlook all too often. In my view, is characterized by stable and persisting changes in what a person knows or is able to do. So change is a fundamental characteristic of learning, but it's not the only characteristic that's important. The stable and persisting change is what's important. You don't know that a change has occurred unless you have some indication of a before and after state. You don't know if it's stable and persisting unless you have an indication of an after state. So we hardly ever take those measurements. So my view is we're rarely in a position to claim learning has occurred on account of X, whatever the X is, because we don't have a pre, seldom have a pre, and we hardly ever have a post indication. So then I also looked at what educational systems have been trying to do over a number of years. I did this in collaboration with a Chinese professor in Shanghai. And we came up with 5 different kinds of things. One was systems that are aimed at developing basic knowledge and skills. We know that, and we think of that especially with primary education, secondary education, improving problems or developing problem-solving skills, developing a productive workforce, a responsible citizenry, critical thinking is associated with that, and lifelong learners. So it's hard for an educational system to do all of these things. So there's going to be something that's going to be dominant. And my view is we've been focused on the early goals here, basic knowledge and skills, problem-solving skills, and we haven't really paid much attention to critical thinking and the higher order activities. So those are just sort of the perspective that I come from. And yeah, those in the back, you should move closer if you want to, because then you'll have better aim if you want to throw something at anything provocative I might be inclined to say along the way, because it's going to get provocative. So this is a group of people at site, right? We're enamored. We love technology. So we believe it's going to solve all kinds of problems. But the reality is, I will say this several different ways in the course of this talk. There's an upside and a downside with any new technology. So I listed a few here: bring your own device, social networking, new pedagogies. So we get excited about what this new technology or this new approach can provide, and we forget about the downside. And typically we overpromise, things don't go so well, and the larger community is building distrust in our professional community. So technologies change. They change what people do, what they want to do, what they can do, eventually what they want to avoid doing. The rate of change is increasing, especially with technologies in our area. Fads come and go, We love technology, and we have a tendency to be faddish. We fall in love with this technology and think it'll solve most or all of our problems. But the technologies are very powerful, and now we live in a global context. So the question is, given that learning is about stable, persisting changes in what a person or group of people know and can do, will these new technologies, adaptive technologies, augmented reality, virtual reality, wearable devices, who here is wearing a Fit or a smart watch? We've got a couple, so they're spreading. That's about a third of the people in this room have what we call those smart devices. At least they're digital devices that give you information. Are they going to improve learning and instruction? That's the question. So I think I've said most of this. So in a way, it's the best of times. We have so many technologies available, so many possibilities available. We can do so much. And it's the worst of times if you're a teacher or an instructional designer, because the richness makes it difficult to figure out what's likely to work best in a particular circumstance. So you've heard this kind of message from people like me before, probably. So then I think, well, what have we learned from history? Being an old guy, I want to say, well, we have done a few things in the last 50 years or so. There's some things that we know can be associated with learning. People who've done well in the past typically continue to do well. Prior knowledge, preparation, and experience is relevant, and it can be a predictor of how things are going to go. The more time a person spends on a learning task, the more likely it is that person will master that learning task. So now we have a lot of interest in motivation, engagement. We want to get this person to spend time on this learning activity, then they're likely to learn. And there's evidence to support that view. And then if we provide timely, informative, and meaningful feedback, that's also going to support learning. And it turns out these three factors work together, or they can work in opposition. So we can't really affect what a person knows that comes into our classroom, but if we know what they know, then we can adjust the instruction or the support for learning to fit that person. We can do something about time on task. There's a lot of research going on now for motivation. A lot of the new technologies are aimed at increasing motivation and engagement. We're not spending enough time on timely, informative feedback, so that's another one of my messages. This formative feedback is lagging behind, and that's where there's likely to be a payoff. Another thing we've learned from the past, along comes a new technology. So we have educational TV. We'll roll the TV into the classroom and replace the instructor. That's a replacement strategy. So we don't change the pedagogy. We just replace one thing with another thing. That's a replacement strategy. And all of those strategies typically produce no significant difference, not much difference in outcome. But we have a new technology in the classroom. We need to rethink, and other people have said this more eloquently than I. Did I skip that? Yeah, I'll skip over this slide. So we overpromise, right? So we've been overpromising for 50 years, so we need to think more carefully. This is a take on Gartner Group's hype curve. Victor Chang is the head of educational technology in Hong Kong. So he took that curve, looked at the way technologies have been introduced into the educational system in Hong Kong, and he noticed that it fit the hype curve pattern, more or less. So along comes a new technology, and we promise a lot. We get excited. We're so enthusiastic. It's going to solve all problems. Then we put it in the classroom, and it turns out when the support people walk away, teachers are lost. And the students aren't prepared, the teachers aren't prepared, and people are disillusioned. If we leave it there long enough, gradually things begin to improve. So that's what the history shows. I'm going to skip some of these slides because I want to get a little bit into research. So things are changing. We're changing the context. We're blending formal and informal. There was a very nice presentation yesterday that I took part in from a distance on blended learning. So we're now blending things in richer ways than we have in the past. Yeah, and I'm going to skip over this slide too. So to summarize how things have been changing, so we used to think of the unit of analysis was the individual learner, but we're now thinking the unit of analysis is a larger thing than just that learner. It's that learner in a context with other learners, a particular teacher, various technologies, a school, culture, an environment, and so forth. The focus used to be on just specific learning outcomes, but now we have larger interest. We want to build a competitive workforce, for example. That's the one driving a lot of things in the U.S. So we want to build interest in a particular domain, not just that a student can learn physics or engineering or something like that, but they persist in that domain over time. So that's more than just a specific learning outcome. And we used to think of learners as rational, right? And this was a huge mistake. So to be rational means that you can identify a goal, you can then identify alternative ways to reach the goal, evaluate the alternatives, pick the optimal choice, and proceed toward the goal. That's sort of the classical model of being rational. The reality is that learners are just like us. They're intermittently rational. Sometimes they are, and sometimes they're not. They have moods, they have other desires, they have other interests. So we have to take that into account. And now we have automated systems that are looking at moods, as well as where eyes are moving on the screen and so forth. So then we can maybe make adjustments. If the person is in changing moods or got interested in something else, we can make an adjustment and redirect that person's interest. Time on task. I hope smart technologies move us up in this hierarchy. So this is one way that some instructional designers think about the various components of instruction. So at the lowest level, they're just bits of information resources that might be used in a particular course or lesson or sequence of instruction. When that bit of information is validated, unlike all of the political discourse occurring in this country, when the bit of information is validated, we know it's reliable, we can call it a knowledge resource. We're going to use it because we know it has some value. When that knowledge resource is linked to a particular learning goal, it becomes a learning resource. Now we've linked it into something useful. You see how this goes? That's not yet instruction, because instruction requires activities around those knowledge resources, learning resources. It requires feedback, formative feedback, a progression, and then summative assessment at the end. Then you have instruction built around those learning resources when you have meaningful and formative feedback. Do you accept this model of things? Nobody's throwing things at me yet. It's pretty straightforward. Okay, a little bit on trends, because we're looking at smart technology and that's an emerging trend, allegedly. So this is the 2016 New Media Consortium Horizon Report. You familiar with New Media Consortium and Horizon reports? These are interesting to look at. They've been done in different domains over a period of years since about 2002 or so. And now they're doing them in China. They're expanding. They're doing them in K-12 settings. They create specific reports in different areas. So this is from the higher ed report this year. And so there's a shift to deeper learning approaches. And so people like Chris Dede talk about deeper learning. Deeper learning takes into account complex learning tasks and appreciating the complexity of all the things involved in a particular environment or situation. Personalized learning, New Media Consortium puts in the area of difficult to implement. So I'll say a little bit about this. So personalized learning in this context means somehow the teacher or the system or the environment knows a lot about this individual learner, not just what they know, but their interests, their preferences, their outside interests, and so forth. And then they know that this learner has a particular goal and is maybe struggling with this particular learning task, and they look at what other learners similar to this learner have done in that situation and provide, by way of a recommendation engine to the teacher or directly to the learner, various things that the learner might choose to do to proceed. So that's the notion of personalized learning. So we're not there yet. the Chinese are going to be there before we are, in my view. So we can take advantage of that. I think New Media Consortium has it wrong here. So they think learning analytics and adaptive learning are near-term technologies. I think that's not really accurate. So I don't think they've been implemented. We know how to do learning analytics, and we know in principle how to adapt learning, but we're not doing it on any kind of large scale yet. Maker spaces are a happening technology. So I would put those a little bit differently. And when I brought this up to Larry Johnson, he's the CEO of New Media Consortium, he argues that it depends on the context. So certainly from school to school or district or state to state or country to country, these things are going to be different. So they have like 400 and some odd people doing these studies, and so there's some bias built in. Affective computing they have as a FAR term, understanding the emotions and so forth of individuals. This is, the next 3 slides here are from, are you able to see those? This is an eye chart, right? So who needs glasses, right? Right, the aging people in the group. I want to talk to these slides. This is one of the recent dissertations I supervised. She just graduated, or she just defended successfully 2 weeks ago, Gloria Natividad. And her task was to, I asked her to look at, because I was asked by Springer, what's being published these days? And so the task became, well, what are the trends of research in educational technology? Initially, I wanted to go back 10 years, and then a serious methodologist said, if you're interested in trends, you need more than 10 years. And so he recommended 20 years. And so she went back 20 years, looked at 10 different journals, 10 of the prominent journals that had existed for 20 years in the area of educational technology. There were about 10,000 research papers that were involved in this analysis of titles, abstracts, and the paper themselves, and then using a particular methodology, latent semantic analysis. She came up with about 22 clustered areas where these papers seemed to focus in different areas. And I want to mention a few because it shows a trend over time. So it goes from back 20 years over time. In the area of student learning, there's been kind of a steady increase. But notice something here in 2005. The increase ticks up quite a bit. So learning environments goes along pretty steady until about 2005, and suddenly there's an uptick in research papers in the area of learning environments. Faculty training in adult and education goes up a little bit and then suddenly starts to drop around 2005. So I'm pointing this out for a reason. Online learning does what you would expect, gradually increases. We don't know if this downtick here means much, it's too early to tell. But again, right about 2005, something is going on that causes this sudden uptick. So one of the outcomes of her research, I can go through all of these, it's pretty interesting stuff. This is really a description of what, is being published using a very sophisticated methodology. What's going on in 2005 that causes virtual environments to drop dramatically and then suddenly pick up? I actually don't know, but I'm asking you. I asked this question in Beijing also when I was there last week. What's going on in 2005 that can be correlated or maybe causally connected with these changes and what's being published in our field? What happened in 2005? It just seems more than coincidence. I mean, when you dig through the data. Any volunteers? I had one person volunteer an answer, but it turned out it's not true. What do you think? Yes, please speak out loud. Yeah, and that was similar. The iPhone got introduced in 2007, as I recall, so that happened a little bit later. What was the precursor to iPhones? What was it? Blackberries were around. So you think that might have been associated with this change? Yeah, you're shaking your head no, because Blackberries were totally different from what the iPhone provided. iPhone sounds reasonable, but it happens too late to account for these changes in what we're publishing. And you figure there's about a year delay also in research being published. Someone say, but the web had been around before. The what? I'm sorry, I didn't. I'm an old guy, so I have a hearing problem. I'm sorry, I still didn't hear it. Oh, hard to see. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I'm posing the question because she's willing to share all of these data. So this is big data, what she's created, this analysis of 10,000 papers. She's willing to share. And there's a lot of unanswered questions. The one about 2005 is one. Back in the back, they want to speak out. She's dancing. Go for it. Yeah. Well, see, I've accomplished what I wanted to accomplish, and it'll come up on my last slide if I ever make it there, is to get you to have questions. I have this question, but now I hope you have this question too, and then you pursue it, because yeah, it seems interesting. Okay, so I'm supposed to talk about smart learning environments, so I'm going to say some things, and I'm going to leave some time at the end for discussion. The early efforts are really associated with intelligent tutoring systems. And so some of you, who knows about an ITS, intelligent tutoring system? A few people who are older than dirt remember these things, but I'll give you an idea of what they were. So these work typically on a workstation. It was software that got installed on your workstation. They consisted of a model of the knowledge domain, a model of teaching about, a pedagogical model for teaching things in that particular domain, and a model of the learner as the learner progressed through the sequence of instruction. So what would happen? And they were done in various situations. In universities, typically they were done by computer science department to support programming, or programming in Lisp, which is a write-only language, right? And it's difficult to figure out what programming in Lisp is like. Or they were done in elementary school for addition, subtraction, and those kind of tasks. Very well-defined tasks. So you had a right or wrong answer, and the wrong answers could be categorized into what they called bug libraries, or libraries of incorrect responses, where we knew, or the system could know what the misconception was that led to that kind of response. So the learner goes through a sequence. They get something wrong. The system, the ITS, then looks through its bug library, got this wrong, looks through the domain knowledge and the instructional model and says, oh, with this kind of mistake, this is what we should have the learner do next, and then presented that to the learner. So it was one-dimensional. So it treated the learner as a one-dimensional thing, a cognitive processor who made mistakes. That was the view of the learner. It had one-dimensional view of the subject matter, and it had one-dimensional in terms of output devices. The computer was going to be the output device. They were somewhat effective, but what did they do? They, committed the hype curve violation. The people in the ITS community promised a 2 standard deviation improvement in learning if you would just use this ITS. And did it ever happen? No. In the simplest cases, especially with early kids learning mathematics, they did get improvement. They got about a 1 standard deviation improvement consistently. But they also had very limited applicability, had to be a very well-defined domain, and it took a lot of effort, which means money, to develop an ITS. So they never went to scale, right? But we learned a little bit about student modeling and so forth. Have I been fair to the ITS community? Yeah, so. What's that?
Overly generous.
Overly generous? No, but these people are still around and they're doing interesting things. They're part of our community. We need to embrace them and say, thank you for the lessons learned by getting it wrong, right? So now we know, well, that's how we all learn, is by getting it wrong. We need to take into account more than just a learner as a cognitive processor. We need to think about domains that are not so well structured as what they were tackling. And now we have all these rich output devices. We can do all kinds of wonderful things, so it's not just a screen on a computer. And then we can blend in all kinds of experiences for the learner. So we've learned a lot by getting it wrong. Okay, so that's how I came into this enterprise. And that first journal, the Smart Learning Environments Journal, asked me if I would write an article conceptualizing how I thought about smart learning environments. So I said, well, I'm not really an expert in this area, but, I have this habit of saying yes, so I said yes. And so what I did was I looked from three different perspectives from I'm a philosopher, so I had a philosophical perspective. I had a psychological perspective that integrated behaviorism, cognitivism, and other views, and a technological perspective. So I'd seen things fail for all kinds of reasons. But then I thought, well, we can't call it smart if it doesn't work, right? So in order to be called smart, the person has to get the answers right. Your sister has to be insightful and right most of the time. So a necessary condition for a learning environment to be smart is that it's effective, and that's efficient, and that it can go to scale. It doesn't just work in this classroom with these learners. We can take it across the school district or in now multiple societies. We can use it globally. So I thought of those are necessary. It can't be called smart if it's not usable, if it's not effective. It's desirable if it's engaging for the learner, because there's all this research that shows time on task is important, engaging the learner, therefore, is important. It needs to be adaptive, right? In order to be engaging, we need to take into account what the learner is doing and what the situation is and make some adaptations. And then we need to make it personal, right? And that's more than just calling the learner by a name, but recognizing that this learner has interest and so forth. And then likely characteristics are that it would be like a smart teacher. It would be conversational. It would talk to you. And now we have Siri and Cortana and all these devices talking to us. And then on the comedy shows, they talk back, right? I'm going to tell you a quick story. Have I got time? A GPS, that would give instructions. We have these, global positioning systems and get directions and go places. And so I had one, and I was going to a remote school in Georgia, to help with technology integration in this school. And I was driving with my technology guru, who had been to this school before, but I had not. And he was driving the car, and we had the GPS. And the GPS says, turn left at the next intersection. And he said, no, I know it's straight. I'm going to go straight. So he ignores the GPS, goes straight. Predictably, the GPS says, take the next left turn. No, I know we're going right, Mike. We're going to keep going. This is the right way to go. And then again, turn left, and he ignores it again. There's a long pause, and we miss a bunch of turns. And then the GPS says, this is a true story, eventually you will want to make a U-turn. And of course, she was right. And of course, we cursed, right? We were late. Anyway, so this is my first attempt at characterizing what a smart learning environment would be like. Conversational would be nice. It would be nice if it was reflective. It would be nice if it could do something innovative. It could reflect on, the system could reflect on its own behavior and improve over time. So the second journal, a year later, starts up, and for some strange reason, they said, Mike, can you write us an article about this? I said, well, I've already done one. And I showed them the other article. I said, well, but that was a year ago. Things have changed. Technology's changing so much. I said, well, I'll do something different this time. Instead of looking at the research literature, I'll actually look at the systems people are calling smart. And so I spent 6 months or so, identified, I forget, 20 some odd systems, and I went through the characteristics of these systems other people were saying were smart or intelligent or whatever, and I started listing the characteristics, and that's what you see down this left column here. They adapt to users, they're aware of the context, they're dynamic, they provide dynamic formative feedback, they engage learners, they empower learners, learner control is part of this. They get better over time, right? That wasn't true of very many, but it was a characteristic of some. They monitor the progress of the learner, and sometimes they monitor their own progress. They can predict outcomes of what's going to happen. So those were the characteristics I found. And then I thought, well, it's not just the learner we need to take into account. We need to take into account the teacher, the designer, the support people, and the process of evaluation. This iterative process is important. But I kept the hard line that it can't be smart if it's not effective, right? So I kept that part. But then after this got published, or it's in press, actually, I realized what had happened, that I had been looking at smart learning, things people called smart learning systems, and came up with a list of characteristics that apply to smart teachers. So we're full circle now back to that original question I asked you, do the characteristics of a smart person apply to a smart system? And my answer, discovered after going through this process, is, by and large, yes. Right? That's Mike's view. I could be wrong. The terminology is not used that way. Smartphones did not initially have any of these characteristics, right? So it would have been inappropriate to call a smartphone smart. But they're getting better, right? Siri talks back. Okay, how am I doing on time? Who's my timekeeper? Right, I can keep going. I can talk for another 3 hours easily. So, nope. But I want to leave some time for discussion. So maybe I'll go about 5 more minutes. I forget what's coming up. I'm on slide 33 of 57. This always happens. But related technologies, I think personalized learning and learning analytics are on the way. But as I said before, we're not there yet. So it turns out one of the things that can be done is to provide dynamic formative feedback in the context of a student learning to solve complex problems that are ill-structured, that don't have one right answer, right, that have multiple approaches to the problem and multiple acceptable answers. And so there's some technologies, and I've been associated with a couple of these, aiming to do that. They're only research tools right now, but they've been used and validated in 15 or 20 different studies. And the idea basically is they elicit how a person is thinking about a complex problem. They have stored how experts have thought about that same problem, and then and these systems ask 4 basic questions after they present a representative problem or a particular problem in a domain. So they ask, what are the key factors influencing resolving this problem? How would you characterize each of these factors? What are the relationships among these factors? And how would you characterize those relationships? That's the fundamental, the 4 questions, right? And then those are put into a system. And it turns out they can be analyzed in the form of an annotated graph or an annotated causal influence diagram. And when I did this originally, I had no confidence that it would work, so I asked a couple additional questions. What else would you need to know to solve this problem, and what assumptions have you been making? It turned out I didn't need to ask. They're interesting questions because they promote reflection, but this was the very earliest tool. So it was just, you gave a problem and you ask for what are the factors. You drop a node. Then you had to annotate the node. Then you had to drop more nodes and annotate these nodes and link the nodes together. And early on, I thought it might make a difference if we knew the order in which somebody thought about the nodes and the links. Turns out, interesting methodology. Let's see. Yeah, later this afternoon, there's a session on replication studies, right? So which we don't do in order to build knowledge about smart learning environments or anything else and to have scalable results. We need to do Replication Studies, 415, I think, in room E, right? So I got confirmation from back there. So, and we need to have similar instruments. And there's a place where there's a Stellar site at NSF, STELAR, that has a list of validated instruments that can be reused. And I've used that site for one of my studies. Okay, I'll close it out here. We've been over-promising. I said this before, right? And we think each new technology is going to solve something. MOOCs, by the way, are wrongly named. They're not courses. If you remember that hierarchy of things, they don't have the instructional components to be called a course. The C should stand for community. So massive, open, online communities. Without the stuff that smart learning environments can bring, they will not become courses, right? But they have the potential to become courses when we get our technology scalable. So sometimes I knew you'd be throwing things at me, so I'm going to be prepared to duck. So I'll close out with, again, a smart learning environment is going to have some of the same characteristics that a smart teacher has. My father would say that a teacher is someone of the voice that encourages, the ear that listens, the eye that reflects, the hand that guides, the face that does not turn away. That's my father's view of what a teacher is. My view is a teacher is someone who gets others to have questions. That's why I wanted you to have that question about what happened in 2005 that changed publications in our field. Having a question is different than asking a question. So we want our smart systems to get students to have questions. That means they're going to spend time and effort, engage. They're going to spend time and effort in exploring possible answers. There's going to be they'll be open to alternative answers, and they might be willing to question their own assumptions. That's what it means to have questions. So our job is to get people to have questions. So what questions do you have? Did I leave enough time? 10 minutes or so? Yeah, about 10 minutes for questions and answers, discussions. So as long as you don't leave the room in large groups, it's okay. No, really. Feedback, comments, questions? This was all too simple-minded? Yes, it's Teens.
You were talking about MOOCs, indeed, and if you look at the history of smart systems, there seems to be, when the MOOCs were integrated, that they stopped using smart systems, in my impression. For example, we used a lot of tools to make learning materials where we could track things in, and when we shifted to MOOCs, suddenly we start using some kind of blogs again to provide information.
Yeah. So the problem with MOOCs is, I mean, the thinking was nice. We want to reach as many people. We want to make it as accessible and open to everybody. But it turns out, what's the attrition rate in one of these MOOCs? I actually experienced this myself because I had AI in my background, and I went through the Stanford AI MOOC, and so I saw firsthand what was going on. 95% of the people or so dropped. So if 95% of the people drop my class, I'm going to get fired eventually if this continues to happen. So we're not really reaching people that we want to reach. The people who did well in that particular MOOC, or people like me, they were already prepared. They could go to the library and check out a book in Chinese on AI and do well. They were going to do well no matter what. So we didn't really get to the people we wanted to get. We might have interested a few people that we would not other of interest, but we didn't really get to the potential. We can do better with MOOCs, and MOOCs are now being designed by instructional designers and not by just some famous teacher. So they are getting better, but they still lack this dynamic, formative feedback, especially for complex domains. Mike, I think you're about to ask a question.
Thanks a lot. That's very helpful. It seemed like a lot of the discussion was focused on formal learning environments.
Yeah, that's true.
You mentioned teaching a lot, and I'm not sure, maybe another discussion about the relationship between smart learning and formal teaching. So one example is when you talk about AR, VR
Yeah.
I'm wondering where we are with smart learning in the real world, informal.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I know more, and I've seen more in the formal learning environments. I was just in Beijing, as I mentioned, and at the Smart Learning Institute at Beijing Normal University. Chi-Kit Lu was there, and he does work with augmented realities. Chris Dede did a talk from a distance about his work, both with augmented and VR, and they were actually blending together, with the AR especially, a formal and an informal thing. So the two blended together nicely, and I thought that was powerful because it kept the learner, the AR approach kept the learner embodied in the real situation. Eventually they went to the real world with some augmentation and had some real experience. But then they would go back to the class and then work on problems. And I thought that was a powerful approach. So I think that's what I would put in that category of pedagogical approaches that I had a list before, and I think that has a lot of potential, specifically with AR. I know the hype is now over the VR stuff, but from what I saw in Beijing, it looked like AR may have more potential, but that's just my view. And you know a lot about this, I know, so is that consistent with how you're thinking about it?
I would agree that AR has potential to be more pedagogically engaging.
Yeah. Yeah.
Related to the year 2005 is the foundation of YouTube, I suppose.
YouTube? Oh, interesting.
The year of 2005 is in 2005 we recognize the idea of video distribution worldwide education infrastructure. Not only the education, but also the vast majority of
One of these was on. I thought one of the categories was on visualization, but I guess I'm not remembering it correctly. But that would be a way within the data she collected to look at that as a possible explanation. Tandra? I can barely hear you. I'm sorry.
It could be that a couple factors are coming into play with 2005. I'm thinking that we actually introduced technologies into the schools in the mid-80s, and that the people that were coming to play as editors had gone through the school system and might have been emerging in 2005, and they were maybe like more digital natives and more things were important to them, and so they therefore decided to look at different things than us old-timers may want to look at. So maybe it's a couple things that are in play.
Yeah. I sometimes call that the Moses effect, right? It takes a couple generations for something to happen. So, great thing happens now, 40 years later, right?
Again, of 2005, wasn't that the year of Second Life?
Second Life. Oh, interesting. So I've gotten you to have some thoughts about this, right? Yeah, this is really, I've been successful. Yeah. What's that? Web 2.0, yeah.
I did some history look while I was here. When I first introduced it,
Yeah. Okay,
I use my, it's a smartphone when I know what I'm looking at.
yeah.
It was introduced in 1999, and a lot of the technologies that we're talking about was rolled out, Facebook and a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So what there was some history of it. So it would be about that long for the lag time for 2.0, because we talked about how 2.0 is going to change the classroom.
Yeah. Not yet, but the fellow with the intelligent sister.
So you said, one of your comments, you said that you think China's going to be there before we do. And I actually just read an article about how the research being done by educational researchers in America is being implemented overseas in a lot of different countries, and they're having a lot of success with the research that we're doing that isn't getting implemented in the United States. So
Well, I'm not sure, again, because I just have some limited experience, but there are a couple factors here. First of all, the Chinese school systems are much more regularized than American school systems, so they can dictate what the curriculum will be. Number two, the people who supply the educational support and the systems that are used in the schools are basically under the control of the government. So they cannot keep information proprietary. If the government says share, they share. So with regard to big data, in school settings, the Chinese have actual access to extremely large data sets with hundreds of thousands of students that they can mine to improve things over time. And you're right, they have the skills and learning analytics to be able to do it. So I think those couple factors give them an edge that we just don't have in America.
And I think there's also a big difference in identifying variables that relate to each other and developing the system itself. And I think it also benefits from describing the variables that relate to each other and then developing it in practice. I think that's
Yeah, now oddly enough, in January when I was there, I visited a couple schools. They wanted me to advise them how to introduce these technologies into schools. They have some of the same problems that we have. Teachers have been taught a different way. They're used to doing something. They've been teaching the way they've been teaching for 20 years. So the natural question is, now you're telling me I'm incompetent if I don't learn how to use this new technology. So they have resistance in the schools, but they have a different culture, right? They're going to have to do it. And I think, so my idea was to propose a strategy for bringing those teachers around. And by the way, it's don't focus on the early adopters strategy, which has been what we've been doing. The idea is focusing on the representative middle adopter teachers, because if they can be successful with a new technology, other teachers are going to see this and be on board much more quickly than if the bright, your sister adopted it and they said, well, she's special. I can't be like her, right? Anyway, that's my advice, yeah. I know we have 1 or 2 minutes left. What are your thoughts, Berner? I'm curious.
Looking at these smart technologies in the laboratory and in the schools. At least in our country, I'm from Sweden. But the way what we call smart technologies may be introduced is actually not through the teachers, but through the students. Adopting sort of their education technology. So that's sort of what we see.
Yeah, that might work in this country. I'm not sure that works with the culture in China, but yeah, that's interesting. So, any last words? But well, thanks for your questions and thanks for listening. Have a good conference.